There are people who move through life as if time bends around them, people who rush into rooms with apologies, explanations, and a sense of chronic delay that seems to follow them everywhere. Society often labels them as irresponsible, careless, or disrespectful. But the psychology behind people who are always late is far more complex and far more human than simple laziness. Chronic lateness is not just a habit. It's a window into deeper emotional patterns, hidden beliefs, and internal conflicts that shape their relationship with time. Some people are late because they live in a different mental rhythm, more intuitive than structured, more present, moment-focused than future-oriented. Others struggle with anxiety, perfectionism, or internal resistance that slows them down even when they know they should move faster. Some are late because they underestimate time, others because they avoid it, and some are late because lateness becomes a shield, protecting them from emotional discomfort, expectations, or even from themselves. When we understand the psychology of lateness, we stop seeing it as a flaw and start seeing it as a story of overwhelmed minds, unrealistic optimism, or hidden fears. And the more we understand this story, the more compassion, clarity, and self-awareness we gain, both for ourselves and for anyone who seems forever to be running behind. Many people assume lateness is simply a choice, but for those who struggle with time blindness, it's a neurological experience, not a moral failure. Time blindness means a person cannot accurately sense the passage of minutes or predict how long tasks will take. To them, time doesn't feel like a steady, measurable flow. It feels elastic, inconsistent, and often abstract. They may genuinely believe they can get ready in 10 minutes, even though they've never once managed to do it in less than 30. The brain constructs a version of reality that feels true, even when it repeatedly proves false, and this distortion shapes their behavior in ways that they often don't fully understand. Time blindness is frequently seen in people with ADHD, but it can appear in anyone. These individuals don't intentionally delay. Instead, they operate in a world where later feels much closer than it really is, and now feels all-consuming. Their mind becomes absorbed by whatever captures their attention in the moment. An idea, a task, a conversation. And without realizing it, minutes slip into half, hours and hours disappear entirely. When they finally check the clock, the shock doesn't come from irresponsibility, but from sincere disbelief. They truly thought they had more time. To them, the future is not a vivid, looming reality, but a vague concept. They don't feel future consequences, they only understand them intellectually. This disconnect makes planning difficult and estimating time nearly impossible. Even when they set alarms or create schedules, they often ignore or override them because the mind hasn't internalized the urgency. The present moment feels louder, more important, more emotionally pressing than the distant tasks waiting ahead. Time blindness also creates cycles of guilt and frustration. These individuals often feel terrible about their lateness. They apologize, promise to do better, set new systems. But when the emotional memory of the stress fades, their natural time perception takes over again. This creates a loop that others misinterpret as lack of effort, when in fact, it's a struggle against an internal system that doesn't align with societal expectations. Ironically, many people with time blindness are intelligent, creative, and capable. They just don't experience time the way others do. Their minds operate in bursts rather than timelines, in deep focus rather than step-by-step planning. They are often brilliant problem solvers but poor time estimators, attentive listeners but rushed arrivals, dedicated workers who always feel like they're racing against a clock they can't see. Understanding time blindness allows both the individual and those around them to let go of judgment. It reframes lateness from a flaw into a cognitive pattern. And once awareness grows, compassion grows with it, because it becomes clear that these individuals aren't choosing to be late. They're navigating a world built around clocks while living with a mind that reads time in its own unique language. People who are always late often underestimate how long tasks actually take, a pattern rooted in what psychologists call the planning fallacy. This isn't simply optimism, it's a deep cognitive bias. Their brain paints an idealized version of the task instead of the realistic one. When they think, "I'll be ready in 15 minutes," they picture the best-case scenario: no interruptions, no distractions, no unexpected steps. They imagine themselves moving efficiently, almost flawlessly, but real life never unfolds that way, and the mind conveniently ignores that history has proven this many times. This underestimation happens automatically. The brain simplifies the future, compressing time and deleting details. It forgets the small tasks that add up: finding keys, answering a message, picking out clothes, packing a bag, dealing with minor inconveniences. Because these moments seem too small to remember, people don't consciously include them in their mental timeline. Thus, a routine that actually takes 35 minutes gets mentally reduced to 10. The brain lies and they believe it. People who fall into this trap aren't careless. They are often idealists or big-picture thinkers. They see the destination so clearly that they overlook the journey required to get there. They genuinely believe things will go smoothly because their mind naturally filters out obstacles, delays, and human limitations. This is why they are confident when they say, "I'll be there in 5 minutes," even though they haven't left the house. To them, that prediction feels emotionally true, even if it's logically impossible. Another layer of this bias comes from emotional memory. They remember how something felt, not how long it objectively took. If getting ready felt easy last time, they remember the ease, not the actual duration. They reconstruct reality through emotion rather than measurement. Over time, this creates a distorted internal clock that constantly promises, "You have more time than you think." People who consistently underestimate time also struggle with transition periods, moving from one activity to another. Their mind may resist stopping what they're doing because transitions feel mentally heavy. So instead of leaving early, they keep stretching the moment, believing they still have time to spare. By the time they finally shift tasks, the window for being punctual has already closed. This pattern is often misunderstood by others. Outsiders see lateness as disrespect or laziness, but the truth is far more psychological. These individuals usually feel terrible about being late. Every delay chips away at their confidence, and every rushed arrival reinforces guilt. But the planning fallacy is stubborn. Even after repeated failures, the brain continues to predict short timelines because the optimistic illusion is emotionally comforting. In the end, underestimating time isn't a character flaw, it's a cognitive habit. A habit shaped by idealism, mental shortcuts, emotional bias, and difficulty with transitions. And unless someone learns to consciously override this inner time illusion, they remain trapped in a cycle of good intentions and late arrivals, forever rushing to catch up with a clock their mind refuses to see accurately. People who are consistently late often live in a distorted perception of time, one where minutes feel more spacious, consequences feel distant, and deadlines feel negotiable. Their mind creates an internal buffer zone, a psychological illusion that convinces them they still have plenty of time. Even when they are already behind, this is not simple carelessness, it's a cognitive bias known as time optimism, where a person repeatedly overestimates how much they can do and underestimates how long tasks truly take. They believe they can compress reality to fit their desires, moving through life as though time will bend to accommodate their intentions. This illusion makes lateness feel unintentional, even though it becomes a persistent pattern. Underneath this illusion is often a deeper struggle with self-regulation. Many who are chronically late have difficulty transitioning between tasks because switching state, stress to work, comfort to discomfort, relaxation to responsibility, requires mental energy. The brain resists that shift, choosing the path of least psychological friction. This is why someone can sit for hours knowing they must leave soon, yet only stand up the moment they are already late. Their mind chooses temporary comfort over the long-term consequences of tardiness, even though it costs them stress, embarrassment, and damaged trust. There is also an emotional component. Lateness often becomes a coping mechanism for avoiding anxiety. For some, leaving early causes discomfort. They fear waiting, being too early, or facing social interactions before they feel mentally prepared. Arriving late becomes a way to minimize time in situations that trigger unease. In this sense, lateness is not irresponsibility. It is emotional self-protection disguised as bad time management. Another layer of psychology involves habit loops. Once a person repeats lateness enough times, the brain begins to normalize it. The body becomes accustomed to last minute rushing, adrenaline spikes, and the chaotic rhythm of running behind. Oddly, some people become addicted to that sense of urgency. The rush becomes part of their internal tempo. Life feels flat without the pressure, so they unconsciously recreate it. Finally, chronic lateness often reflects a person's relationship with their own worth. People who struggle to value their time struggle equally to value the time of others. It isn't arrogance. It's often a deep disconnect from structure, self-discipline, and long-term self-respect. To overcome lateness, they must first learn to see time not as an enemy or an illusion, but as a mirror reflecting how they treat themselves and those around them. Some people who are always late carry an unconscious belief that their schedule should flow naturally around their emotions rather than around objective time. They let their internal state dictate their actions. If they don't feel ready, they delay, even when they rationally know they are running behind. This emotional dependency creates a fragile relationship with responsibility because tasks are never approached from discipline. They are approached from impulse. When emotions fluctuate, so does their punctuality. It's a pattern that feels spontaneous to them, but unpredictable and frustrating to everyone else. This emotional-based behavior often begins in childhood environments where structure was either too rigid or not present at all. If they grew up in chaos, lateness becomes familiar, a continuation of the disorganized rhythm they were raised in. If they grew up overly controlled, lateness becomes rebellion, a subtle way of reclaiming autonomy. In both cases, time becomes not a neutral measurement but a battlefield for psychological expression. They are not just late to appointments. They are late to confront the internal conflicts that time exposes. At a deeper level, many chronically late individuals struggle with emotional prioritization. They know what they must do, but they become overwhelmed by the emotional cost of doing it. Starting a task feels heavy. Preparing to leave feels draining. Their brain avoids micro discomforts even though it creates macro problems later. This avoidance is not laziness, it is emotional fatigue disguised as poor scheduling. The person delays because the emotional effort feels larger than the actual task. People who operate this way often underestimate how much their lateness affects others because they're absorbed in managing their own emotional turbulence. They're not being disrespectful, they're trying to regulate themselves, but in doing so, they unintentionally create stress for everyone around them. Over time, this pattern erodes relationships. Others begin to feel unimportant, even though that was never the intent. The path out of this cycle begins with emotional detachment from momentary feelings. When someone learns to act based on intention rather than impulse, time stops being something they react to and becomes something they direct. The moment they realize that responsibility doesn't require the right mood, they start showing up not only on time, but fully present, stable, and aligned with the best version of themselves. Chronic lateness is often rooted in a person's distorted perception of time, where minutes don't feel like fixed units but flexible suggestions. They live with an internal illusion that there's still plenty of time, even when the clock says otherwise. This cognitive bias, called time optimism, leads them to underestimate how long tasks actually take. Getting ready, commuting, finishing a small job. These things feel shorter in their imagination than they are in reality. As a result, They plan according to fantasy, not the real world, and their day collapses under the weight of miscalculated moments. This distorted time perception is not a conscious choice. It's often connected to how their brain processes attention and transitions. They may enter tunnel mode, where they become hyper, focused on one activity and lose awareness of time passing, or they may jump between tasks impulsively, assuming they can accomplish everything at once, only to realize too late that their mental estimates were unrealistic. Their sense of time is fluid, not structured, which makes routines, deadlines, and schedules feel like foreign concepts rather than stable anchors. Emotion also plays a powerful role. People with this pattern often pursue the most stimulating or comfortable activity in the moment because it feels easier than preparing to leave or start something less interesting. When they're absorbed in something enjoyable, time compresses. When they face something stressful, time expands. Their internal clock bends around their emotional state, creating a disconnect between what they feel and what is actually happening. For some, this time distortion is a coping mechanism. If they struggle with anxiety, perfectionism, or fear of confrontation, running out of time becomes a subconscious escape. If they never start early, they never have to face the discomfort of preparing, the anticipation of pressure, or the vulnerability of showing up before they feel ready. Lateness becomes a protective shield. I'm late because I misjudged time, instead of I'm overwhelmed and don't know how to cope. But the consequences slowly accumulate. They rush through life, always apologizing, always stressed, always feeling like they are chasing a world that moves faster than they can understand. Their relationships strain, opportunities slip away, and their self-esteem quietly erodes because each late arrival becomes evidence that they can't control their own life. The transformation begins when they learn to externalize time rather than rely on their internal sense of it. Clocks, alarms, checklists, and structured routines act as anchors that compensate for the brain's distortions. When they begin to see time not as a subjective experience, but as a neutral structure they can align with, they develop a more grounded presence in the world. They shift from drifting through their days to intentionally participating in them, and life becomes calmer, clearer, and far more manageable. Some people who are always late carry an unconscious resistance to structure, authority, or being controlled, and this resistance subtly shapes their behavior around time. Lateness becomes more than a habit. It becomes a quiet rebellion, a way of preserving autonomy in a world that constantly demands compliance. They may not say it aloud, and they may not even recognize it within themselves, but following strict schedules feels like surrendering their freedom. Being on time feels like being dictated by external expectations, so they subconsciously push back by moving at their own pace. This resistance often develops early in life. People who grew up with overly strict, controlling, or demanding environments may associate punctuality with obedience, pressure, or judgment. Time-based rules, bedtimes, school schedules, deadlines, once symbolized someone else's authority. As adults, they may reclaim power by refusing to be governed by the clock. They're not trying to be disrespectful or irresponsible. They're trying to feel like they are in charge of their own life, even if that means showing up 10 minutes late. For others, lateness gives a sense of psychological space. Structure can feel suffocating, commitments can feel like traps, and routines can feel like chains. The act of delaying, leaving the house a bit later, lingering in an activity longer than they should, gives them a momentary escape from the pressure of being on all the time. It's a way of saying, I'll get there when I decide, even if the decision ends up creating stress or conflict. This dynamic also appears in people who fear losing their identity in relationships, work, or social obligations. Being late becomes their way of preserving individuality. They don't want to be absorbed into the demands of others, so they unconsciously sabotage timeliness as a boundary. It is a subtle way of asserting independence without verbalizing discomfort. Yet, this unconscious rebellion rarely brings the liberation they imagine. Instead, it creates cycles of guilt, embarrassment, and frustration. They often know they're disappointing loved ones, damaging first impressions, or hurting their professional reputation. They apologize repeatedly, promise to do better, and then fall into the same pattern because the emotional root remains unaddressed. The conflict between wanting to be free and wanting to be reliable plays out every day, often leaving them feeling misunderstood and internally conflicted. Understanding this pattern doesn't excuse it, but it explains why the behavior is hard to break. Real change requires recognizing that structure isn't inherently oppressive, it can be supportive. Time management doesn't erase identity, it protects energy and relationships. When they learn to view punctuality not as surrender, but as self-respect and emotional maturity, the internal resistance begins to soften. They start approaching time consciously rather than defensively, and they discover that they can maintain autonomy without sabotaging connection or credibility. People who are always late often struggle with an internal optimism bias about time, an overly positive, unrealistic belief that they can accomplish more in less time than is actually possible. This isn't simple carelessness, it is a genuine distortion in how they perceive time, tasks, and their own capacity. They consistently underestimate how long things take and overestimate how quickly they can move, leading to a cycle of rushing, apologizing, and repeating the same pattern day after day. This optimism bias is rooted in a psychological need to feel capable, productive, or efficient. Many chronically late people see themselves as someone who can pull it off, even in tight time frames. They believe they can shower, get ready, drive across the city, and still arrive with minutes to spare, despite countless past experiences proving otherwise. Their brain holds onto the ideal scenario, not the realistic one. It's not intentional deception, it's self-preservation. Admitting that things take longer feels like admitting a personal limitation. For some, this unrealistic time perception is tied to personality traits such as high openness, creativity, or emotional distractibility. Their minds wander easily, their attention jumps between tasks, and they lose track of minutes because they are immersed in whatever they're doing. When they finally look at the clock, they genuinely feel surprised. Time slips away not because they don't care, but because they live more in their thoughts than in their schedules. For others, this optimism bias masks anxiety. Believing they have more time than they do gives temporary relief from the pressure of deadlines. It allows them to avoid confronting stress until the last possible moment. But as soon as they realize they're running late, anxiety floods in, creating a frantic, chaotic scramble that reinforces the whole cycle. Their days become a loop of unfulfilled intentions followed by self-criticism and renewed promises to change. Another layer of this bias is emotional. These individuals often say yes too easily to tasks, conversations, favors, opportunities, because they want to be helpful or avoid disappointing others. They believe they can fit everything in, not recognizing that saying yes to everything is exactly what sets them up to be late. Their optimism doesn't come from arrogance, it comes from a desire to please, to accomplish, to not miss out. The problem is that this time optimism rarely aligns with reality. Instead, it leaves them feeling overwhelmed, rushed, and chronically behind. They are not lazy, they are miscalibrated. They don't need discipline as much as they need recalibration, learning to see time accurately, not ideally. When they finally begin adjusting their perception, doubling the time they think tasks will take, planning buffers, being honest about their limits, their life transforms. They discover that punctuality is not about perfection, it is about alignment with reality. And once they learn to honor the real flow of time rather than their imagined version of it, they become not just more reliable, but more peaceful, more confident, and far less stressed.